In a city full of complexity and conflict, our story begins with a devastating accident, sparking an ongoing debate about responsibility and justice. Rebecca Carter, an arrogant female police officer who believes she is always right, finds herself in a tense confrontation with Judge Marcus Grant in a highly charged courtroom drama. Rebecca's life has always been surrounded by overconfidence and decisions made without considering the consequences. But everything will change when she is forced to face an undeniable event. The accident that Rebecca is involved in is not just a simple traffic incident. It is a situation where the wrong choices made by a police officer could affect the lives of many others. Edward Lopez, a middle-aged man, becomes the victim of the accident and will face Rebecca directly in court. But not everyone can forgive a mistake, especially when the protagonist, Rebecca, continues to believe she did nothing wrong. As the trial begins, all eyes are on Rebecca. Her arrogance is evident in every action and gesture. She refuses to stand when the judge enters the courtroom, and her attitude heightens the tension in the room. But this arrogance is only the surface of a much deeper story. Behind it lies a complex tale of power, responsibility, and the choices we all must face in life. With the appearance of Judge Marcus Grant, known for his fairness and principles, things begin to shift. Rebecca's overconfidence is about to meet a significant challenge, one that she cannot avoid. But will Rebecca realize the lesson she needs to learn? Or will she remain lost in her own arrogance? Stay tuned to find out how this confrontation unfolds. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow the next part of this story. The courtroom is filled with tension, a silence that speaks louder than any words could. The case that everyone is waiting for is about to begin. In one corner of the room, Rebecca Carter stands confidently, or perhaps more accurately, arrogantly. Her back is straight, her eyes scanning the room with an air of superiority. The faintest smirk dances at the corner of her lips as she takes her seat, seemingly unbothered by the weight of the situation. Rebecca Carter, a decorated police officer with a reputation for being both competent and ruthless, has been accustomed to being in control, whether it's out in the field, making decisions about life and death, or when dealing with her fellow officers. Rebecca has never known a moment where she wasn't the one calling the shots. However, today, as she sits in the defendant's seat in a courtroom, she is forced to confront a reality she has long avoided. Her overconfidence, once a symbol of strength, is now a glaring flaw. As the doors to the courtroom creak open, all attention shifts to the entrance. In walks the person everyone has been waiting for, Judge Marcus Grant, a man known throughout the legal world for his unwavering commitment to justice, fairness, and integrity. Judge Grant has built a reputation for being both unyielding and wise. His reputation precedes him, and his presence is commanding. The room quiets even further as he walks to the bench, his robes sweeping across the floor, the sound echoing through the hushed space. The gavel strikes, and the trial officially begins. Court is now in session. Judge Grant's voice resonates throughout the room, steady and resolute. His eyes scan the courtroom, pausing briefly on Rebecca. His gaze is not one of judgment, but one of recognition. He understands the gravity of what is to come, and he knows that this trial is not just about the facts of the case. It's about the truth that lies beneath the surface. Rebecca shifts in her seat, trying to maintain her composure. But there's an underlying sense of discomfort that cannot be hidden. She crosses her arms defensively, her eyes locking with the judge's. A silent challenge. It's clear that she doesn't think she's done anything wrong. In her mind, this is just another obstacle in her career, another issue to overcome, and nothing more. But for the first time in her life, the stakes are higher than she realizes. Judge Grant begins by introducing the case, a tragic accident that occurred several months ago, one where Rebecca was involved. The victim, Edward Lopez, a man in his late 40s, was severely injured in a car crash that could have been avoided. The details of the incident are clear, but Rebecca's actions and the choices she made in the heat of the moment are in question. As the details of the case unfold, Rebecca's eyes narrow. She's heard this story before. She knows how it ends, or at least, how she thinks it should end. She's used to making decisions on her terms, in the field where there are no second chances. But this is different. This is the courtroom, And here, the rules of engagement are not in her favor. The prosecutor stands up, laying out the facts. Edward Lopez was simply going about his day when Rebecca, responding to a call, drove recklessly through an intersection, ignoring traffic signals, and causing a collision that left Lopez with severe injuries. The prosecutor doesn't mince words. This wasn't just an accident, it was a preventable tragedy. The courtroom listens attentively as the prosecutor makes his case, painting a vivid picture of what happened that day. Rebecca listens to the accusations, her jaw clenched. She could refute them, of course, but there is no denying that her actions played a role in the incident. The question, however, is whether she truly bears responsibility. She shifts in her seat again, uncomfortable with the fact that her actions are being scrutinized in such a public forum. She's used to the respect and authority that comes with wearing the badge of a police officer. But here, in the courtroom, that badge means little. The tension is palpable as Rebecca's lawyer stands up to offer a defense. The defense attorney is calm, collected, and measured in his approach, carefully choosing his words as he begins to dismantle the prosecutor's case. He points out inconsistencies in the witness statements. He emphasizes Rebecca's history of good service, and he reminds the court that accidents, even tragic ones, happen in the line of duty. He argues that there is no malice in Rebecca's actions, and that the incident was just a tragic mistake, one that does not warrant the heavy punishment that is being demanded. As the defense attorney speaks, Rebecca feels a sense of relief wash over her. Her lawyer is doing a great job, and perhaps, just maybe, the case can be turned in her favor. The more she listens, the more confident she becomes that the outcome will be in her favor. She even begins to smile, thinking about how this will all be behind her soon. But her moment of comfort is short-lived. The prosecutor stands again, and this time, there is a sense of finality in his tone. He calls forth the victim, Edward Lopez, to testify. As Lopez enters the witness stand, the atmosphere shifts once more. The man who has been forever changed by this accident now faces the woman who caused it. His face is etched with pain, not just from the physical wounds, but from the emotional toll of the incident. Lopez begins to speak, his voice shaky but clear as he recounts the events of that fateful day. Rebecca looks at him, but her gaze is unflinching, her demeanor still cold and composed. She does not show remorse, nor does she show any signs of guilt. In her mind, she did nothing wrong. But as Lopez's testimony continues, her confidence begins to waver. She feels the weight of his words, the anger in his voice, and the undeniable truth that this man's life was forever changed because of her actions. Judge Grant watches the exchange closely, his expression unchanged. He's seen this kind of thing before, the arrogance of a defendant who believes they are above the law. But what makes this case unique is the way it forces everyone in the room to question what truly constitutes justice. Is it the letter of the law? Or is it the human consequences of a decision that can never be undone? With each passing moment, the tension grows. Rebecca's sense of control slips further away as the testimony continues. She is no longer the confident officer in control of the narrative. She is now a defendant, caught in the web of her own choices. The courtroom has become a battlefield, and Rebecca is beginning to realize that the fight she faces is far more complex than she ever imagined. The audience holds their breath as the scene unfolds, waiting for the pivotal moment when Rebecca will have to face the consequences of her actions. But for now, the stage is set, and the stakes are higher than ever. The question remains, will Rebecca continue to deny responsibility, or will she eventually confront the reality of the situation? As the scene ends, there is a palpable shift in the room. The audience, the lawyers, and even the judge all sense that the next phase of this trial will be the most decisive. And for Rebecca, the moment of reckoning is fast approaching. The tension in the courtroom has reached a boiling point. Rebecca Carter, once so confident in her righteousness, now finds herself trapped in a web of her own making. Her eyes, once cold and unyielding, now flicker with doubt. The weight of Edward Lopez's testimony hangs in the air, suffocating the space between the defendant and the witness stand. The room is silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of the court reporter's keyboard and the occasional shuffle of papers. The audience holds its breath as the final pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. Rebecca refuses to show any sign of vulnerability. She straightens in her seat, her arms crossing tightly in front of her chest, her gaze fixed ahead. Her pride won't let her back down. And yet, something within her begins to shift. The realization that she may have truly caused harm to another human being starts to gnaw at her. Like a slow burn deep inside. She had always been so sure of herself, so certain that she was in the right. But now, faced with the consequences of her actions, she is starting to see the cracks in her armor. The courtroom is heavy with anticipation as the prosecution prepares to present their next piece of evidence. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney who has worked on countless high-profile cases, steps forward with a sense of purpose. His eyes briefly meet Rebecca's, his expression one of unwavering determination. He knows that this is the moment that could turn the tide in the case. He has the evidence, and with it, he can expose Rebecca for the reckless, irresponsible officer she truly is. Your Honor, the prosecutor begins, his voice calm but firm. We have one more witness to call, and this witness will shed light on the true nature of what occurred that day. A series of events that cannot be swept under the rug, no matter how hard the defense tries to downplay it. With a subtle gesture, the prosecutor signals for the next witness to take the stand. A young woman steps forward, her face pale and apprehensive. She holds a folder in her hands, but her trembling fingers reveal the anxiety she feels. She is not a seasoned witness like Edward Lopez, but her testimony is just as crucial. The woman, a fellow officer who was with Rebecca on the day of the accident, begins to speak in a soft, shaky voice. Her words are hesitant at first, but as she continues, a clearer picture of the events begins to form. I was there when it happened, the young officer says, her voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca, she wasn't herself that day. She was rushing, too fast. She didn't even stop at the intersection. It all happened so quickly. I tried to call out to her, but she was already speeding through. The crash, it was like it was inevitable. Rebecca's jaw tightens at the mention of the crash. She wants to shout, to argue, to claim that the young officer is mistaken, but she can't, because deep down, a part of her knows that what the officer is saying is true. The pieces of the story she had tried to suppress are coming to the surface, and there is no escaping them now. The courtroom reacts in a hush, the weight of the witness's words hanging heavily in the air. Rebecca can feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, scrutinizing her every move. She can feel her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she tries to maintain control over the situation. Judge Marcus Grant watches intently, his expression unreadable. He has seen this before, witnesses who testify against their own colleagues, the truth coming to light in ways that are often painful. His role is not to pass judgment on the individuals involved, but to ensure that justice is served. And in this case, justice will be a difficult thing to navigate. Rebecca's defense attorney, sensing the shift in momentum, rises quickly to interject. Objection, Your Honor, he says, his voice filled with urgency. The witness's testimony is based on her perception and not concrete facts. She cannot definitively claim that Officer Carter was reckless in her actions. We are dealing with the inherent unpredictability of high-pressure situations. Judge Grant's eyes narrow as he considers the objection. After a brief pause, he raises his hand to silence the room. Overruled, he says, his voice calm but firm. The witness will continue. The defense attorney bites back a frustrated sigh and sits down, his eyes flicking to Rebecca. She can sense the rising panic in the air. She had hoped the defense would be able to turn the tide in her favor, but now it seems as though the walls are closing in. The testimony of this new witness, combined with the prior account of Lopez, is quickly shifting the perception of her actions from one of self-defense to one of negligence. As the young officer continues to speak, she describes the frantic moments after the crash. She speaks of the way Rebecca's hands trembled as she exited the vehicle, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. The young officer recalls how Rebecca failed to take responsibility for her actions, insisting that it was just a freak accident and that no one could have predicted the outcome. The prosecutor listens carefully, his eyes never leaving Rebecca. He knows that this is the moment that could break her. If he can convince the jury that Rebecca's actions were reckless and that she is unwilling to acknowledge the consequences, he will have won the case. The young officer's testimony, coupled with the earlier statements from Edward Lopez, is enough to paint a damning picture of Rebecca's behavior. Rebecca's eyes dart nervously around the room, her hands gripping the sides of her chair. She is no longer the confident officer who once commanded respect. She is a defendant, vulnerable and exposed. She can feel the judgment of the room weighing on her. The eyes of the jury, the prosecutor, and even Judge Grant seem to pierce through her, seeing the truth she has spent so long trying to hide. But Rebecca is not one to back down easily. She will not allow herself to be broken, not without a fight. With a sharp breath, she rises from her seat, her legs trembling slightly as she walks to the witness stand. There is no turning back now. "I'll testify," she declares, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. "I'll testify to what really happened." The room falls into a hushed silence as Rebecca steps forward, her eyes locking with the judge. She knows that the moment she opens her mouth, there will be no going back. The truth, whatever it may be, will be laid bare for all to see. Judge Grant nods, signaling for her to proceed. "Go ahead, Officer Carter," he says, his voice steady. "You may take the stand." Rebecca takes a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knows that her words will have consequences, but she has no choice but to speak. The question now is whether the truth will be enough to salvage her career, or whether it will be the final nail in the coffin of her defense. As Rebecca begins her testimony, the courtroom listens in rapt attention. This is the moment when everything changes, the moment when Rebecca's fate is sealed. The conflict, once simmering just beneath the surface, has now escalated into an all-out battle for justice. And for Rebecca, the outcome is uncertain. Her words, though carefully chosen, do nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. She explains her actions on the day of the crash, justifying them as best as she can. But even as she speaks, she knows that her defense is weak, that the truth she is offering cannot erase the damage caused. She can feel the weight of her own guilt pressing down on her shoulders, a burden she can no longer ignore. But what she doesn't expect is the harshness of the response. As she finishes speaking, she sees Judge Grant's expression harden. His eyes are no longer filled with sympathy or understanding. They are cold, calculating, as if he has already made his decision. "You may step down," he says, his voice quiet but firm. "We will now proceed with closing statements." The room is silent as Rebecca returns to her seat, her mind racing. The escalation has reached its peak, and now it is only a matter of time before the final judgment is rendered. The once confident officer is no longer certain of anything, and the outcome of this trial is now entirely out of her hands. As the silence of the courtroom stretches on, a palpable sense of unease settles over everyone present. The tension in the air feels almost tangible, heavy with the weight of anticipation. The key moment has arrived, the moment when Rebecca Carter's fate hangs by a thread. She stands before Judge Marcus Grant, the very embodiment of impartiality and discipline. Throughout the proceedings, his demeanor has been calm, measured, even sympathetic at times. But now, something in his gaze has shifted. It is no longer the look of a judge observing a trial. Now, it is the gaze of a man who understands the gravity of what is at stake. Rebecca, her posture still rigid despite the turmoil within her, feels the eyes of the entire courtroom on her. The defense has rested, and the prosecution has made its final arguments. Her defense attorney has done everything he can to downplay the severity of her actions, but even he knows deep down that the tide has turned against them. Rebecca's own testimony, though delivered with poise, did little to convince the jury. The evidence, the witness testimonies, and the overwhelming sense of guilt in the room all point to the same truth. Rebecca has been reckless, negligent, and unapologetic in her role in the accident. Now, only Judge Grant has the power to determine what comes next. Rebecca's eyes flicker nervously toward the judge's bench. She knows that he is a man of principles, a man who holds the law above all else. And in his eyes now, she can see something that wasn't there before, a deep, unshakable resolve. It is clear that he will not be swayed by her status. her position, or the powerful connections that have shielded her in the past. This trial is not about politics or power. It is about justice, and Judge Marcus Grant intends to deliver it, no matter the cost. Officer Carter. Judge Grant begins, his voice low but resonant, filling the room with a weight that cannot be ignored. His eyes do not leave Rebecca's face, but his words are not directed at her alone. They are meant for the entire courtroom, for the jury, for the prosecution, and for the defense. His words are a clarion call to the truth, a truth that has slowly but surely emerged over the course of the trial. We have heard all the evidence. Judge Grant continues. We have listened to the witnesses. We have examined the facts, and we have seen the consequences of your actions. It is now my duty to ensure that justice is done and that the law is upheld. Rebecca's heart pounds in her chest. Her breath comes in shallow bursts, the anticipation of what is to come making her head spin. For the first time in the trial, she feels the true weight of the situation, the reality of the situation, the depth of her transgressions begins to settle on her shoulders. She can no longer escape it, no longer pretend that her actions don't matter. The consequences are real, and they are closing in on her. Judge Grant pauses for a moment, allowing the gravity of his words to settle into the minds of everyone in the room. His gaze never wavers from Rebecca, but there is a subtle shift in his expression, a flicker of something deeper, more personal. It is as though, for just a moment, he is no longer the judge, the impartial arbiter of the law, but a man grappling with his own sense of justice. His lips tighten, and his voice grows firmer as he continues. Rebecca Carter, he says, his words slow and deliberate. You have shown a blatant disregard for the responsibilities entrusted to you as a law enforcement officer. On the day of the incident, you failed to exercise the basic duty of care that anyone, let alone a police officer, is expected to uphold. You acted with impatience, with arrogance, and with a complete lack of regard for the safety of others. You rushed. You ignored the rules. And in doing so, you caused irreversible harm. Rebecca flinches at the harshness of the words. She wants to interrupt, to argue, to plead her case once again, but she knows it would be futile. There is no escaping the truth of what has been laid before the court. She can feel the eyes of the jury on her, each one silently passing judgment, waiting for the final verdict. Your behavior was not just reckless. Judge Grant continues, his voice steady and unwavering. It was a betrayal of the very principles that you swore to uphold when you took the oath to serve and protect. You have put yourself above the law, and you have shown no remorse for your actions. In fact, throughout this trial, you have displayed an arrogance that borders on contempt for the justice system itself. Rebecca's breath catches in her throat. The words cut through her like a blade, each one exposing a raw nerve, each one a reminder of how far she has fallen. She thought she was above reproach. She thought her position, her power, would protect her from the consequences of her actions. But now, as she stands in the presence of Judge Marcus Grant, she realizes how wrong she was. Your conduct throughout this trial, Judge Grant says, his voice growing stronger, has only reinforced the image of someone who believes they are above the law, and that, Officer Carter, is something I cannot and will not tolerate. The courtroom is still. Even the defense attorney, who has fought so hard to protect his client, seems to realize that the game is up. He sits back in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes averted from the judge. There is no more hope for a favorable verdict, no more room for negotiation. Judge Grant's words have sealed the fate of Rebecca Carter, and there is no turning back. Rebecca's face flushes with anger, her jaw clenched in defiance. She wants to scream, to shout, to demand that this injustice be stopped. But deep down, she knows that the judge is right. Everything he says is true. She has been reckless, irresponsible, and unforgivably arrogant. She has been given the opportunity to serve and protect, and instead, she has squandered it. The shame of her actions begins to well up inside her, a nauseating realization that she cannot escape. But there is no time for reflection now. The trial is reaching its conclusion, and Rebecca's fate is about to be sealed. The only question that remains is what kind of sentence Judge Grant will impose. He turns to the jury, his gaze shifting from Rebecca to the group of men and women who have been tasked with rendering a verdict. Their faces are solemn, their eyes focused on the judge as they await his instructions. Judge Grant knows that the weight of this decision falls not only on him but on the jury as well. Together, they must ensure that justice is served, that the consequences of Rebecca's actions are both fitting and fair. With a final look at Rebecca, Judge Grant speaks again, his voice commanding and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he says, "you have heard the evidence. You have heard the testimony. It is now time for you to deliberate and decide what punishment, if any, is appropriate for the actions of Officer Rebecca Carter." The room is silent as the jury begins to deliberate. Rebecca stands, her body tense, her mind racing. She knows that whatever comes next will be the defining moment of her life. The outcome of this trial will determine not only her future but her legacy. The question is no longer whether she will be found guilty, it is how she will be punished for her actions. And with that thought, the trial enters its final phase. As the jury deliberates, Rebecca is left alone with her thoughts, with the heavy realization that no matter what happens next, she will never be the same. The courtroom is steeped in an eerie silence as the jury files back into their seats. The air feels thick, almost suffocating, as everyone awaits their decision. The weight of the trial, the conflict, the tension that has built up over the past hours, has reached its peak. Rebecca Carter stands at the center of it all, her eyes flicking nervously from the jury to the judge, her entire being taut with the anticipation of what is to come. It feels as though the world has come to a standstill, and for a fleeting moment, it's impossible to tell what direction this trial will take. The jury four-person stands, their voice cutting through the stillness, the words they speak setting the course for Rebecca's fate. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Rebecca Carter, guilty of all charges related to the accident involving Mr. Edward Lopez." The verdict hangs in the air like a heavy stone, and for Rebecca, time seems to stretch out as the realization of what has just been said sinks in. Her heart skips a beat, the blood draining from her face. The sound of the words echoes in her ears, each syllable crashing like thunder, reverberating in the courtroom. In her mind, guilty. She's been found guilty. All the hope she had clung to, the belief that she might somehow escape the consequences of her actions, is shattered in that one moment. There is no longer any escape, no more room for denial. The truth has been spoken, and it is undeniable. Judge Marcus Grant, who has been the stoic figure at the center of it all, now shifts his focus to the defendant. His eyes are firm, unyielding, yet not devoid of a subtle sadness. He does not look at her with disdain or contempt. Instead, there is a quiet gravity in his gaze, a recognition that this moment is far more than a legal decision. It is a turning point in the life of a person who, for all her flaws, once stood in a position of power and respect. But now, as the trial nears its conclusion, it is clear that she will have to face the consequences of her actions. "Officer Carter," Judge Grant says, his voice calm but resolute, "you have been found guilty. Now, it is time for the court to determine your sentence." His words land like a blow to Rebecca, and for a moment, she feels as though the weight of the entire courtroom is pressing down on her chest. The air is so thick with tension that it's almost impossible to breathe. Her lawyer shifts uncomfortably beside her, but there is no more arguing, no more pleading. All the defense strategies have come to a halt. All the words she once spoke in her defense now meaningless. The reality is inescapable. There will be no escape from the judgment that is about to be passed. And as much as she wants to stand tall, to hold on to the last shred of her former arrogance, Rebecca knows deep inside that this is not the time for pride. This is the moment when her reckoning will come. The courtroom buzzes with whispers, the air thick with anticipation. The prosecutor, having been triumphant in securing a guilty verdict, stands ready, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's figure. He has played his part well, bringing to light the reckless actions of the defendant, exposing her arrogance and lack of remorse. Now, it is his turn to speak once more. "Your Honor," the prosecutor begins, his voice steady, filled with the weight of the case he's just won. The actions of Officer Carter on the day of the accident were not just negligent. They were a disregard for the very values she was sworn to uphold. Her conduct was an affront to the badge she wore and to the citizens she vowed to protect. We ask that the court impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of her actions and the harm caused to Mr. Lopez. There is a sense of finality in the prosecutor's words, a call for justice that resounds through the courtroom. He is not seeking revenge, but rather the necessary consequence for a woman who thought herself above the law, who thought she could escape the fallout of her recklessness by hiding behind her uniform. But now, as her guilt is laid bare, there is no more hiding. The court must ensure that justice is not only served but is seen to be served. And for Rebecca, the cost of her arrogance is about to be revealed. Judge Grant listens intently, his face unreadable. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't show any hint of emotion, but the gravity of his next words hangs over the courtroom like a storm cloud waiting to burst. He turns toward Rebecca, his gaze piercing through her with an intensity that cuts through the chaos swirling in her mind. "Officer Carter," he says, his voice unwavering. "The court has carefully considered the facts of this case, the evidence presented, the testimonies given, and your own actions have all led us to this moment. You were entrusted with a position of authority, with the duty to uphold the law and protect those who rely on it. And yet, on that fateful day, you violated that trust. You acted recklessly, without regard for the safety of others, and caused irreversible harm." Rebecca swallows hard, the words stinging as they pierce through her defense. She has heard them before, but now, in this final moment, they take on a new, unbearable weight. Her heart races, her hands tremble, but she knows there is no escape from what is coming. She has always thought that her position, her power, would protect her from consequences. But now, as Judge Grant speaks, she realizes how mistaken she has been. There is no amount of arrogance or entitlement that can shield her from the truth. The actions you took that day have left a permanent scar on Mr. Lopez and his family. Judge Grant continues, "Your disregard for the law, your failure to take responsibility for your actions, and your complete lack of remorse throughout this trial have made it clear that you have not learned the gravity of what you've done." Rebecca's breath catches in her throat, and she feels the weight of Judge Grant's words crushing her. There is nowhere to run, no more room for excuses. The reality of the consequences she now faces becomes painfully clear. Her body feels as if it's being crushed under the weight of her own guilt. The judge pauses, allowing the tension to build before he delivers his final decision. The room holds its collective breath as everyone waits for the sentence that will define Rebecca's future. "Officer Carter," Judge Grant says, his voice cutting through the silence with a finality that cannot be undone. "You are hereby sentenced to 200 hours of community service at the Los Angeles Veterans Assistance Center. Your sentence is to begin immediately. You will report to the facility to begin your service at the earliest opportunity." Rebecca's heart drops. She can hardly comprehend the words. 200 hours. The magnitude of the sentence, while not as severe as some might have expected, still feels like a crushing blow. For someone who once stood at the pinnacle of law enforcement, a figure of authority, this sentence is nothing short of a fall from grace. The humiliation is almost more than she can bear. The finality of the sentence hits her like a wave, and for the first time since the trial began, she feels the enormity of her mistake. The reality is sinking in. She will no longer be the respected officer she once was. She will be forced to face the consequences of her actions in a way that will change her life forever. Rebecca stands in stunned silence, her mind racing. She wants to protest, to argue, to claim that this punishment is unfair. But she knows that it would be pointless. The trial has ended, and the judge has spoken. There is no going back. As the courtroom slowly begins to disperse, Rebecca is left standing in the center of it all, a woman whose pride has been shattered, whose life has been irrevocably altered by her own choices. She has learned a harsh lesson. The law does not bend to personal power, and justice will always find its way, no matter who you are. The gavel falls, and the court is adjourned. The courtroom empties, its heavy doors swinging shut with a dull thud that echoes down the hallway. The buzz of hushed conversations fades, and the steady hum of the city outside feels distant, almost surreal. Inside the room, however, the echoes of the trial linger. The judge has made his final ruling. The jury has spoken, And for Rebecca Carter, life will never be the same again. The gavel has fallen, and with it, the last remnants of her once untouchable identity as an officer of the law crumble. As Rebecca leaves the courtroom, her steps slow, each one weighed down by the crushing reality of what she has just experienced. She no longer carries the confidence she once had, no longer the arrogance that had so defined her. Instead, there is a quiet, almost hollow recognition of her vulnerability, a stark realization that no matter how powerful or untouchable she once believed herself to be, she is now subject to the same laws as everyone else. But despite the profound change she is undergoing, there is something else at play, a subtle shift, a change in the way she perceives the world around her, a lesson, hard-earned, that cannot be easily ignored. Rebecca Carter is no longer just a law enforcement officer. She is now a person who has been forced to confront her own mistakes, her own actions, and the consequences that follow. It is in this moment of reflection that the true lesson begins to unfold, not just for Rebecca, but for everyone who has witnessed her fall from grace. The world of law enforcement, of authority, of power, can be intoxicating. It is easy to lose sight of the humanity behind the badge when you are constantly surrounded by the trappings of authority. The uniform, the respect, the belief that you are above the rules, that you are somehow exempt from the consequences of your actions. But as Rebecca has learned the hard way, there is no such thing as immunity. Power may grant you influence, but it does not give you the right to act without accountability. For Rebecca, the courtroom verdict was a wake-up call, a moment of reckoning that shattered her false sense of security. The sentence of 200 hours of community service at the Los Angeles Veterans Assistance Center was not just a punishment. It was a powerful statement about the value of responsibility and the importance of empathy. In a moment where she could have continued to deflect, to deny, she was instead confronted with a reality that she could not escape. And in that moment, Rebecca began to realize that true strength lies not in exerting power over others, but in accepting the consequences of your actions and using those experiences to grow. Her service at the Veterans Center will be a long and arduous journey. It will not be easy for Rebecca to work side by side with those who have sacrificed so much, knowing that her own actions, her reckless disregard for the safety of others, led to the very circumstances that brought her here. But it is in this humility, this willingness to serve and atone, that Rebecca may begin to heal. The journey ahead will be filled with challenges, but it is the first step toward redemption. In the end, the lesson Rebecca learns is simple, though profound. No one is above the law, not the powerful, not the privileged, and not the people who wear a badge. Justice is blind, and in the eyes of the law, all are equal. For those who falter, who make mistakes, the path to redemption is not always straightforward. It may require humility, the willingness to face uncomfortable truths, and a recognition that actions have consequences. But the story of Rebecca Carter is not just about a woman who fell from grace. It is about the potential for growth, the possibility of change, and the hope that even in our lowest moments, there is the chance to rebuild and rediscover the humanity we might have lost along the way. For the audience watching from the sidelines, Rebecca's story serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of responsibility and accountability in our own lives. We all make mistakes. We all falter. But it is how we respond to those mistakes, how we take responsibility for our actions, that defines who we are as individuals. The world may not always be forgiving, but the first step in earning back that forgiveness is acknowledging where we went wrong and taking the necessary steps to make things right. As the story closes, Rebecca Carter's future remains uncertain. Her path will be difficult, filled with moments of doubt, guilt, and self-reflection. But within her lies the possibility of change, the potential to become someone who learns from her mistakes, who uses her experiences to help others, and who ultimately finds a way to reconcile her past with the person she strives to become. And so, as the credits roll on the screen, the audience is left with more than just the resolution of a courtroom drama. They are left with a deeper understanding of the values of justice, responsibility, and the consequences of one's actions. The message is clear. No one is above the law, and it is never too late to make a change. For Rebecca Carter, the journey is only just beginning, and her story, though filled with hardship, is one that offers hope for those who choose to take accountability and begin the road to redemption. We hope you enjoyed this story and its powerful message. If you'd like to see more stories that explore important life lessons, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with others who might find it meaningful. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking stories. And remember, it's never too late to change and learn from our mistakes.